Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most ridiculous case anyone has ever come to you with wanting to sue? Story 1. Client wanted to sue for no strawberries in fruit salad. Client wanted to sue because there were no strawberries in her fruit salad which she bought from a supermarket. Thankfully, a secretary was able to screen the call. She asked if the package said it had strawberries, and the response was, "No, but I thought it would have." I don't know how these people manage to make it through life. Story 2. Man sought compensation after harming himself. Note bene, this is pretty graphic, so you might want to skip this one if you don't have a strong stomach. The guy who severed all of his fingers would be a serious contender. He clearly had some really awful mental illness, I assume schizophrenia or psychosis, but I never really found out what his deal was. Anyway, he had decided one evening that a good way to get some money would be to break into a butcher's shop and use their equipment to harm himself, which is pretty much exactly what he did. He was found the next morning, somehow having survived. He was put in a mental health facility and made a pretty much full, albeit fingerless, recovery. Anyway, he wanted to sue someone. He didn't really know who he wanted to sue. He had just got it into his head that if he was injured, he would get compensation. I remember his biggest question was whether he would get more money if he went back and did the same to his feet too. Story 3. Woman claimed voodoo by neighbors, sought legal action. A lady once called asking us to sue her neighbors. They were using voodoo on her. Fortunately, she had psychic powers and thus knew what they were doing. I respectfully declined. Story 4. Man wanted to sue underwear company for curved penis. Without going into too many details, had a guy that wanted to bring a class action against the company that made his underwear because he was convinced his underwear was the reason he had a curved penis. He assured us that as soon as the jury saw his private parts, they'd side with him. No, we didn't take it. Story 5. Client insisted on suing for non-existent volcano ownership. A guy found a rock in the middle of Melbourne's central business district that he believed came from an underground volcano, therefore he discovered the volcano and he owned the volcano, and that the Melbourne City Council and indeed the Victorian government should pay him rent to live on top of his underground volcano. No, I did not take on the case. Story 6. Lawyer represented a cleaner fired for sexual harassment. I once represented a guy who was denied unemployment benefits after being fired from his job as a cleaner at an adult video store for sexual harassment. I won. Edit. As explained down thread, I am almost entirely certain that my client was not the same guy who did the AMA a few months ago. Story 7. Client wanted to sue for 20-year-old computer warranty after throwing it out window. I run a consumer advocacy firm. I had a client come in and tell me that he bought a product, and the company refused to honor the warranty after the product broke. I asked for details, and he just started screaming in my face asking if I was going to take his money or not. I decided then that I wasn't taking him on as a client, but I wanted to know what was going on. I convinced him to tell me what happened. Turns out he bought a computer back in the 1990s. It had just recently died. But not because it was old and just stopped working. It was slow, so he picked it up and threw it out the window. Then he tried to return it for a refund. Story 8. Lawyer convincing client not to sue library for one-day ban. I met with this guy who wanted to sue a library because they had banned him for one day. Apparently, he was being disruptive, and the administrator told him that he was banned for one day. Fortunately, I was able to convince him what a monumentally stupid idea this was. Story 9. Client wanted to sue for $20 quadrillion over PVC pipe patents and brain chip. I am not sure if this really counts as stupid, but I had a prospective client who wanted to sue for infringement of his patents on polyvinyl chloride piping. He wanted $20 quadrillion 4 times over. He also had a computer chip implanted in his brain by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I sent him to the local hospital that specialized in implanted computer chips. Story 10th Street clown sought to sue another for routine theft. I did a pro bono case for a street clown who wanted to sue another street clown for stealing his routine. You can't copyright a routine because it isn't stored in a medium. I told him that, but he insisted we try to break some new legal ground. Story 11. Judge's staff encounters UN conspiracy against rednecks. Throwaway for obvious reasons. I work for a judge, and we get some absolutely ridiculous cases. The most ridiculous was this guy who alleged an international United Nations-based plot against rednecks, that was the word that he used, in America, and how they had some super-secret high-tech army to eliminate rednecks. He was in prison and was requesting a presidential pardon, a boatload of money, a church and tax-free status, recognition as a sovereign nation, etc. He was suing the government, and the continent of Asia, yeah, the whole continent, and the United Nations, etc. He also, as proof, said that he sent letters to Britney Spears and she never answered, which proves a big conspiracy against rednecks somehow. All of this was in 30-page document, completely illegible in his terrible handwriting. Story 12. Paramedic sued for breaking rib during life-saving CPR. I know a paramedic, and they told me this story. I was out at a restaurant with some of my friends. There was a guy sitting behind us who went into cardiac arrest. I was still a trainee, so I decided to give him cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I kept his heart pumping for 3 minutes before the ambulance arrived. He lived. 3 weeks later, I received a lawsuit complaining that I had broke one of the man's ribs. I saved his life, and he was suing me because I did minor damage. Story 13. Woman sued grocery chain for baby's fingers hurt in cart. My lawyer husband had a woman come into his office with this gem. She wanted to sue a large grocery chain because her baby's fingers had gotten hurt in one of their carts. How so? Well, all she did was put her baby in the cart. You know, down underneath the cart on that shelf where the babies go. Baby's fingers were dangling down and the mom ran over its fingers several times. Story 14. Client wanted to sue for upside-down cheeseburger at McDonald's. My dad is a lawyer, and he had one person come in that wanted to sue McDonald's because she got her cheeseburger upside down in the bag at McDonald's instead of right side up. He also had a person come in, and he couldn't walk because of some injury at work. At the time, my dad was skeptical, so he hired a psychologist to do an examination on him, and she found out that something could be wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Jump to next week, my dad ends up with a video in his hands of the person walking down their driveway to take out the trash. Busted. So my dad called them and told them, "Hey, come on in. We have a breakthrough in your case, and you can get some money for your injury." So the guy comes to his office, and he leaves him sitting in the lobby for almost an hour because my dad knows this guy is a jerk just trying to get money over nothing, which makes lawyers look bad. So then my dad calls him in to the meeting room and plays the video. The guy walked out. Story 15. Client wanted to sue for falling over cat. I am a personal injury lawyer in the United Kingdom. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority, as her home was owned by the council, and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected, she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Edit, formatting, and some tidying up. Story 16. Girlfriend filed for divorce despite not being married. Not really stupid, but unbelievable. My friend at work, his girlfriend filed for divorce a few weeks ago. That's right, they aren't married, and common law doesn't apply in Washington state. They lived together for 5 years. She has a job, she isn't on the mortgage, and she left him a few months ago. There are no kids involved. They were never engaged. In the divorce, she wants him to leave his house, and she wants to move back in. She wants him to pay her $2,800 a month for some reason. I referred him to my divorce attorney, and now that attorney is probably going to represent him. The woman is nuts. She has already tried to get a restraining order against him that was dismissed. Story 17. Client insisted on reading poem in Yoruba for case. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident personal injury claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing in Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't speak any Yoruba at all. As in, not one word. As in, that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language, and I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to leave and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem, to no one in particular, over and over again. In Yoruba. Edit. Thanks for the golds, strangers. Story 18. Client wanted to sue for schizophrenia and hepatitis conspiracy. I was working in a law firm and got a call from reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to a conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and one half of a pair of scissors, so I guess a scissor? She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis, aliens stole her pets, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it, and that she had rights as an author automatically on creation of the work. I told her the most useful thing she could do is ensure she had evidence of her creative work, and that she should send a digital copy to herself and a friend, and also leave a metonica. Story 19. Lawyer defends U.S. in jockstrap lawsuit. My friend who was a lawyer for the Justice Department once had to defend the U.S. in a case where a federal inmate sued because the prison laundry lost his favorite jockstrap. Apparently that sort of thing is very common. Some inmates just want to gum up the system and be a nuisance any way possible. My friend said the suit was dismissed, and the inmate got saddled with a couple $100 in court fees. That's not exactly chump change, when those prison jobs are paying just a few cents an hour. Story 20. Hotel sued over separate beds for cuddling. I read a story about a young man suing a hotel because they had two separate beds for him and his girlfriend and not one joined bed. He sued because they weren't able to cuddle properly. But the judge overturned that claim, saying they could have just moved the beds together, which was entirely possible. Story 21. Woman sues cat's vet for malpractice after being scratched. I worked as a receptionist at a small personal injury firm and was the first line of defense against the more outlandish cases. One of the most ridiculous calls I took involved a woman wanting to sue her cat's veterinarian for malpractice because her cat scratched her, which in turn supposedly caused her liver to fail and a slew of other health problems to arise. She believed the vet was at fault because she was convinced the cat was carrying some obscure disease and the vet had failed to catch it. It was my second day on the job, so I put her through to an attorney, not yet knowing what else to do with such a ridiculous situation. She got a firm "sorry, can't help ya" from our office, in part because we did not do malpractice, veterinary or otherwise, but also because she sounded like a one-way ticket to Crazy Town. Story 22. Man sues over shed, not perfectly aligned with road. Guy came in and had a company build a shed on some land. On the phone he told me it was built incorrectly. He insisted on meeting. When he got to my office, I asked him what was wrong with the building. Was it structurally deficient, dangerous, etc.? None of the above. Turns out it was not perfectly square with the road in front of it. It was off by a foot. You could not tell by the naked eye, but he would always know, and it bugged him. I told him that without any real damages, he had no case. He stormed out angrily. Story 23. Woman slips on duck poop, sues apartment complex. When I was a summer associate, I worked on a case where a lady was suing her apartment complex because she walked out of her unit, slipped on duck poop, and injured herself. We represented the apartment complex. The associate I was working for told me to slip as many bird-based puns into the motion/pleadings as possible. I happily obliged. Story 24. Woman in prison sues state for holding her against her will. A lady in prison in my state tried to sue the State Department of Corrections for holding her against her will. Her lawyer wouldn't touch it. Story 25. Man sues factory for firing him for using substance. Wins settlement. Probably too late here, but I was a civil rights investigator. We had one guy complain that he was fired from his factory job because of his race. He was black. Owner of the factory said it was because the guy was using a controlled substance on his lunch break. Turns out he was using a controlled substance on his lunch break, but so were a few of his white coworkers, and they were not fired. The owner agreed to pay the guy 6 months of back pay and give him a neutral reference. Story 26. Man sues for losing will to live after minor car accident. When I was 19 years old, I was sued by a 50-something-year-old man for $10,000 because I caused him to lose the will to live. Apparently $10K was the magic number to talk him out of self-injury. As you requested, everyone in the U.S. with car insurance has a maximum the driver can be sued for that insurance will cover/represent. My insurance would cover me for up to $10,000. This is advantageous for people looking to make a little money, because insurance companies would rather throw the plaintiff some money and settle than waste time and money to go to court. However, if someone were to sue for more than $10,000, I would have to hire my own attorney, and unless the plaintiff had a strong case, he wouldn't be getting anything at all. I accidentally rear-ended a guy going less than 10 miles per hour. My airbags didn't deploy. He drove an old clunker truck, so my insurance gave him quite a bit of money for his troubles. Considering no damage was really done, it wasn't enough for him. He then tried to file a medical claim, but that didn't fly. My insurance-sponsored attorney found out he was addicted to painkillers, so he'd been in pain for a while. At that point, this man hit the lowest of the low. When I was a teenager, I was served papers stating I was being sued for $10,000 because I caused this man to lose the will to live. Does that sound frivolous to you? It should. Well, on the morning of the deposition, I met the plaintiff's attorney. He was actually a pretty nice guy. He sat right next to me and said, "Hey, I'm sorry about this. I've got to put food on the table, you know." My insurance ended up settling with the guy for about $3,500. I hope his attorney took half. Story 27. Couple falls off wall and wants to sue owner. I did some work experience at a law firm, and a case popped up about a couple who were walking on a wall and fell off. They wanted to sue the person who owned the wall. I've done some insurance coverage work. I am sure they wanted to sue everyone who has ever even looked at the wall. While that's an extreme case, I used to work in flood defense, and one of our projects a while back was a simple moving of a dike in a farmer's field, head dike, a few meters. So it's all done and fine by our judgment, and we get along with things. However, it turns out the contractors didn't quite bury the tip of a drainage/outfall pipe, which was actually a little way down the bank, not even on the crest, which was a footpath. A guy was walking down there, we suspect intoxicated, and tripped over it. The legal case is still ongoing, and yes, he tracked down the owner of the field, and the offending pipe, the builders that put it in. Then our consultancy, who designed the modifications. Then wanted to sue us. However, being quite high profile, our company was wondering whether it was just easier to pay this guy to be quiet because he might become too mouthy, or fight it because it's ridiculous. The more ridiculous thing is that we technically have liability for that approximately 2 centimeters of pipe sticking out of the bank that's not designed for walking on if you follow the paper trail like that guy did. Jesus. Story 28. Judge sues dry cleaners over lost pants. An attorney in Washington, D.C. filed a suit against his dry cleaners for $67 million because they lost a pair of his pants. They misplaced his pants for a couple days, then found them, and offered him about $10,000 as compensation, which he wouldn't take. Part of his suit included a 5-figure sum he claimed was necessary to rent a car to drive to another dry cleaner every time he needed dry cleaning. Story 29. Robber sues homeowner after tripping and stabbing himself. I had a friend who was robbed. The robber trashed his place, stole thousands in electronics and kitchenware, and while carrying a very expensive knife set, tripped on a sticking-up floor tile, fell, and stabbed himself in the shoulder. The robber sued, and, sadly, won a lot, despite the absurdity of suing while committing a crime. Story 30. Man sues mall for emotional distress over bathroom lock. A potential client called recently looking to sue a local shopping mall for negligent infliction of emotional distress because they allegedly failed to maintain the locks on their unisex bathrooms and someone walked in on him during a volcanic poop crisis, causing him distress. Story 31. Sued for rear-ending and barstool fall injury. I got sued once for hitting a guy in my Ram Charger. It was my fault, but he tried to play me and lost horribly. He got into the ambulance at the scene, then decided against it and said he was fine. The same cop gave us both a ride home. He proceeds to go to a bar, get drunk and fall off a bar stool, and hurt his back. Now he's hurt enough to go to a hospital. He sues, but neglects to mention this fact to anyone. My lawyer ripped him apart in court, and I never had to pay a dime, other than what insurance paid for his car. Afterwards, my lawyer told me that was the most fun he's ever had on a case, edited to add, "I have another one too." Someone is currently suing a family member because she veered into the left-hand lane making a right-hand turn, causing this family member to sideswipe them. No idea how that one is going to turn out, but I can't wait to find out. I have yet another one too. I almost got scammed 12 years ago. It was the maddest I've ever seen a cop. I rear-ended a lady in a Toyota 4x4 doing about 10 miles per hour. We were pulling off at a stoplight and she hit her brakes. Brake lights less than setting sun, and I hit her. The only part of my truck to impact her vehicle was a tow hook, about 3 inches long and an inch wide. The entire left side of her back bumper was pushed in, a taillight broken, and minor body damage. I don't have pictures, but it was very clear that there was no way my impact could have caused all that. She claimed otherwise, and very loudly to the officer that reported to the scene. He was furious. He tells me that I am free to go, and I waste no time doing so. As I pulled off, he was giving her the drill instructor treatment. Story 32. Sued by cop's wife for crash injuries, despite not at fault. 2 years ago, I was struck head-on in an intersection by a woman. Driving an SUV, I was driving my dad's Civic. She was speeding and had gone through a red light. My car was totaled, while hers looked like her bumper needed to be replaced. When the police showed up, they told me that she was obviously at fault and not to worry. A few days later, I get a call from my insurance company saying that I was at fault. Turns out the lady that hit me was the police chief's wife. It took a year to fight the case in court, which I eventually won due to the huge amounts of evidence against her, But it gets better. 2 months ago, I get a call from my insurance company saying that they were going to close the case. Huge relief that chapter of my life was over. The next day, I get a call saying that the case was reopened and I was being sued because the lady had suffered injuries in the crash. A crash that I was ultimately found not at fault for. Too long. Didn't read. Cop's wife hits my car head-on, totaling it. Police said I was not at fault, but then wrote up the report saying I was. Ultimately found not at fault in court a year later. 2 years later, she is suing me for her hospital bills and injuries too long. Didn't read the too long. Didn't read sued for injuries sustained in an accident I was not found at fault for. Story 33 sued for parking car that saved falling woman's life. I'm kinda late to all of this and I'm not a lawyer, but here we go. Around 7 or 8 years ago, a woman fell together with her balcony onto my mother's car. This woman was around 55 years old, so she ended up with lots of broken bones and some pretty nasty bruises. Considering that my mom's car pretty much saved her life, she would have fallen from a greater height and onto rough concrete hadn't it been there. She decided it was a good idea to sue us. It's important to note here that, A, it was her own fault that she fell, as she decided that wasting her money on safety checks was of no use. Therefore, no insurance money. B, our car insurance sued her for some of the damage she caused. We paid most of it. Miss Thick as a Brick decides to sue my mother for parking her car there. Story 34. Cat custody battle claiming service animals. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently this angered his ex-GF. The ex-GF sued him for custody of their 2 cats, and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats, because she claimed they were service animals. Hint, they were not at all service animals. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of attention. So to add to the story, one of the reasons my friend broke up with the ex-GF was because she had problems caring for the cats, ignoring them, forgetting to feed them while my friend was away, etc. So her coming back for the cats was clearly all about the fact that my friend was suddenly engaged to someone else. When they went to court, the judge immediately threw out the $500,000 demand because it was ridiculous. Unfortunately, they were awarded joint custody of the cats, which was this woman's way of staying in my friend's life, so he decided it was better if he just gave her the cats, so he could be free of her. Story 35. Suing over child support deductions as theft, by Stu. I had a client come in saying that he needed to sue Stu for robbing all his checks. When I asked him if Stu had a last name, he said no. When I asked him if he knew any Stu, he said no. When I asked him what proof he had that Stu was robbing him, he showed me all of his pay stubs. There were clear monthly deductions by SCU. As soon as I saw it, I knew. I asked, "Do you have children?" He said yes. I then told him, "Your Stu is the support collection unit. They take money out of your check to pay for your child." He left the office insisting that we needed to find Stu. Story 36. Suing over chicken wing parts counting as half. Not a lawyer, but lawyer friend and neighbor told me yesterday of a guy whose client is being sued, trying to turn this into a class action suit to boot, over chicken wings. The claim is that the 10 wings in his order actually constitute only 5 wings because there's 2 edible parts to a chicken wing. In chicken anatomy class, this would be true. In restaurant chicken wing business, not so. Edit. I live in Florida, sue. Story 37. Suing McDonald's for beating up robber's son. Woman wanted me to sue McDonald's because their employees beat up her son, who was trying to rob the place. Story 38. Suing over fake asylum documents. Copied. I'm in immigration, so most of my stupid cases involve people trying to con the system or forgot to tell us material information. One lady stood out, though. She was referred to us as a pro bono case. She was filing for asylum, based on the fact that she's a Chinese national and she's also a devout Christian. If she was sent back, she would be persecuted based on religious reasons. so nothing weird up to this point. She provided me with statements about how she and her family were harassed by the local police, and how certain members of her congregation were arrested. So I'm looking at the statements and the names and places sound familiar. Sure enough, a quick Googling showed this was one of the bot stories. Essentially what happens is there are people on the internet that sells these packages of fake documents and stories for a successful asylum case. From what I've heard, it usually is a real case that was successful, and someone got a hold of the supporting documents and started mass-producing them and selling them. I'm guessing you're supposed to change the names from the original, but this lady didn't. Another red flag was the fact that in her supporting documents, the witnesses kept referring to her in the male form. At first I thought the English translation had typos, but yeah, same thing in the original Chinese ones. Story 39: Tourist Suez Hotel Over Dangerous Beach Recommendation. Some tourist sued a guy from a hotel in Hawaii who had recommended a beach to visit where he became paralyzed due to his own negligence. Dude went swimming at the beach that was recommended despite the multiple signs saying it was a dangerous place to swim. The waves were rough and he ended up paralyzed. The case was dismissed. Story 40: Man sues wife for hiding plastic surgery history. Here's mine. Xian Feng from China saw his newborn daughter, who, he said, was incredibly ugly and did not look like either parent. He accused his wife of cheating on him. At that point, she admitted she had several plastic surgeries before they had met. He sued on the grounds of false pretenses, claiming she misled him by hiding her cosmetic history. He won the case, and his wife was made to pay him more than $120,000. Story 41: Man wanted to sue Canada for denying entry due to felony record. A year out of law school, I once had a potential client who wanted me to sue Canada. Apparently, he could not get into the country due to his felony record. I tried to reason with him that it was up to the sovereign nation to set its own rules regarding entry to the country, but he insisted that we could make a lot of money suing Canada. I didn't take the case, but I told him I might be able to get him a letter that said, "Sorry, from Canada." Story 42: Defended man accused of stealing magic cards from Walmart. As a public defender, I defended a grown man accused of stealing magic cards from Walmart. There was an hour-long security video meticulously showing, from dozens of angles, that he was picking up sets of cards, unwrapping them, and discarding the wrappers around the store. He insisted that he was innocent, and we actually went to a jury trial instead of securing a plea deal. It took the jury 8 minutes to convict him, and the judge laid into my client telling him that he was the worst thief he had ever seen. I forgot the best part. At one point in the trial, I had to spend 45 minutes explaining to the judge what magic cards are. He couldn't understand why anyone need more than one deck. Story 43: Father sued adult daughter for costs of raising her. I'm not a lawyer, but as a child, I was taken into foster care and then returned to my father's custody, so he had custody of me from ages 4 to 16. When I was 22, he tried to sue me for the costs involved in caring for me for that time, saying that he had no obligation to take custody of me and had only done so to save me from foster care. It was obviously dismissed, and I don't talk to him anymore. Story 44: Custody case went back to court over child's eyeglasses. Family law attorney here. I just had a custody case go back to court over eyeglasses. My client didn't like the glasses her ex bought the kid. So stupid. I want to go back to criminal defense. Gang homicide cases had nicer people to deal with than family law. Story 45: Potential client wanted to sue uncle for harming him. I had a potential client come and say that he wanted to sue his uncle for causing him harm. Setting aside the fact that you can't sue someone for harm, I asked him who did his uncle harm. He replied, "Me." I turned the case down. Story 46: Fired for being late due to sugar addiction. Bus driver with therapy rabbit. While working at a plaintiff's employment firm, 2 memorable consults came in one. Guy gets fired for being late too much, wants to sue for discrimination because he has a sugar addiction, and needs to stop at 7-Eleven for a big gulp before his shift begins. As a result, he usually ends up missing the bus. 2. A woman comes in. She was a bus driver and was terminated during her probationary period. She had 3 accidents in 6 weeks. She wants to sue for discrimination because she has anxiety and a therapy rabbit, all the while sitting at the conference room table petting the therapy bunny. Story 47. Witness sued garbage company because accident affected her intimate life. I'm not a lawyer, but I can't not share this story. Years ago, I worked for a garbage company. It was on a rainy Saturday, and I was going to the dump. Up ahead, I see all kinds of police cars and road flares. Turns out one of my buddies working for the company was also going to the dump and lost his brakes going down a hill. He hit the intersection just as the light turned red against him, so he entered the intersection with his garbage truck going about 50 miles per hour. He plowed through 8 cars before coming to rest on top of a relatively brand new Toyota. Fortunately, the guy driving the Toyota wasn't even scratched. His seat broke and he lay flat in his seat with the front wheel of the truck inches from his face. It was a miracle he lived. He didn't sue. The 8 cars Bobby hit didn't sue. But one lady who witnessed the accident sued both the company and Bobby personally, claiming she was so traumatized by the event that it affected her intimate life. Whenever she went to be intimate with her husband, she couldn't go through with it. She claimed all she saw when her husband tried to have intercourse was a big garbage truck bearing down on her. The judge threw it out and told her she was quote, 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 quote. Story 48. Divorced couple in mediation over euthanizing dying dog. A divorced couple went to mediation to decide if it was appropriate to euthanize a 12-year-old Yorkie that was dying. It took 3 hours and nothing was decided. We discussed things like dignity of death, expected quality of life, and loss of consortium and companionship. We did not come to a decision, and the dog died 2 days later. Story 49. Burglar pleaded not guilty despite dropping wallet at crime scene. I wasn't the lawyer on this case, but I was interning for him and went to the trial. The client pleaded not guilty to the charge of burglary, despite my boss's advice. How was he caught? After stealing all of $90 from the house, he ran out, but dropped his wallet, with his ID and social security card inside. Jury did not believe his "it wasn't me" defense. Got 40 years because of priors. Prosecutor offered him 10. Listen to your attorney's advice, criminals. Story 50. Pretended to be lawyer to help Uber driver against abusive passengers. Ridiculous, not for me, but for the accused. Here's the story. I was coming back from a wedding and booked myself an Uber share. The cab arrived and there was a couple, both clearly intoxicated. As soon as I sat, they told me that the Uber driver was a jerk. He's taken forever to drop them to their destination. I asked the driver. He said he had to drop a previous passenger en route, and considering the traffic, the time taken was not unusual. Soon, the driver took the cab to their entered destination. The couple refused to get down and started abusing the driver that it wasn't where they lived. The driver showed me the app that this is what they had entered as location, and he's following that. 30 minutes of further driving into nowhere, the couple had no idea where they lived, so they started abusing the driver again. Then, after 45 minutes, the driver asked them to alight and pay him his dues, since they themselves couldn't find where they had to go. The abuses got worse, and then they threatened the driver that they will anyway not pay him, since he had not dropped them where they lived. I lost it at this point. The driver was a simple, poor man. I told him to lock the car and drive to a nearby police station. They told the police that the Uber driver was harassing them, and that police shouldn't come in between the company, Uber, and them. Now, I told the police I was a lawyer and a lawyer for the Uber driver now. I explained what had happened and told him to register a police complaint. I said I was ready to depose the same before a local magistrate and will see to it that the poor man gets his dues. shocked the crap out of the intoxicated couple. I told the police to do a blood test of the accused and informed them they were intoxicated. Illegal in our country. This made the couple become very scared. The police made them sit in the police van and told they'll be produced before the court the next day on various charges. Eventually, on insistence of the driver, I let them go. They apologized to the driver and me, paid his dues plus a healthy tip, and were allowed to go with a stern warning. Edit. Grammar Edit 2. The driver then dropped me to my place and refused to take money, saying that I had come as a god in his life. Little too much for me, I paid him nonetheless. He asked me. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help.